Monongahela began as a town 14 years later, crossing point for a river ferry connecting to the National Road, now Route 40, which began, appropriately enough, in the town of Washington, Pennsylvania. In 1791, leaders of the curious Whiskey Rebellion met in Monongahela, about a block from the place I was born. Scots-Irish farmers, sick of the oppression of federal rule in the new republic, spoke of forging a trans-Allegheny nation of free men. Monongahela might have been its capital had they succeeded. We know these men were taken seriously back east because Washington, who as a general never raised an army larger than 7,000 to fight the British, as president assembled 13,000 in 1794 to march into western Pennsylvania to subdue the Whiskey rebels. Having fought with them as comrades, he knew the danger posed by these wild men of the farther forests was no pipe dream. They were descendants of the original pioneers who broke into virgin forest. An evergreen and aggressive strain of populism ran through their group character. Monongahela appears in history as a place where people expected to make their own luck, a place where rich and poor talked face to face, not through representatives. In the 1830s, it became a way station on the escape route from Horace Mann-style Whiggery, the notion that men should be bound minutely by rules and layered officialdom. Whiggery was a neo-Anglican governing idea grown strong in reaction to Andrew Jackson's dangerous democratic revolution. Whigs brought us forced schooling before they mutated into both Democrats and Republicans. History seemed to tell them that with school in their hand, their mission was accomplished. Thousands of Americans, sensibly fearing the worst, poured west to get clear of this new British consciousness coming back to life in the East, as if the spirit of General Braddock had survived after all. Many of the new pilgrims passed through Mon City on the road to a place that might allow them to continue seeing things their own way. Each group passing through on its western migration left a testament to its own particular yearnings. There are no less than 23 separate religious denominations in Monongahela, although fewer than 5,000 souls live in the town. Most surprising of all, you can find there world headquarters of an autonomous Mormon sect, one that didn't go to Nauvoo with the rest of Smith's band, but decamped here in a grimier utopia. Monongahela Mormons never accepted polygamy. They read the Book of Mormon a different way. From 1755 until the Civil War, the libertarianism of places like Monongahela set the tone for the most brilliant experiment in self-governance the modern world has ever seen. Not since the end of the Pippin kings in France had liberty been so abundantly available for such a long time. A revolution in education was at hand, as knowledge of the benefits of learning to the vigor of the spirit spread far and wide across America. Formal schooling played a part in this transformation, but its role was far from decisive. Schooled or not, the United States was the best educated nation in human history because it had liberty. When I was a schoolboy at the Waverly School in Monongahela, Peg Hill told us that David Farragut, the U.S. Navy's very first admiral, had been commissioned midshipman at the ripe old age of 10 for service on the warship Essex. Had Farragut been a schoolboy like me, he would have been in 5th grade when he sailed for the Argentine, rounding the Horn into action against British warships operating along the Pacific coast of South America. Farragut left a description of what he encountered in his first sea fight. Quote, "I shall never forget the horrid impression made upon me at the sight of the first man I had ever seen killed. It staggered me at first, but they soon began to fall so fast that it appeared like a dream and produced no effect on my nerves." Unquote. The poise a young boy is capable of was tested when a gun captain on the port side ordered him to the wardroom for primers. As he started down the ladder, a gun captain on the starboard side, opposite the ladder, was struck full in the face by an 18-pound shot, his headless corpse falling on Farragut. Quote, "We tumbled down the hatch together. I lay for some moments stunned by the blow, but soon recovered consciousness enough to rush up on deck. The captain, seeing me covered with blood, asked if I were wounded, to which I replied, 'I believe not, sir.' Then he said, 'Where are the primers?' This brought me to my senses, and I ran below again and brought up the primers." Close quote. The Essex had success. It took prizes. Officers were dispatched with skeleton crews to sail them back to the United States. And at the age of 12, Farragut got his first command when he was picked to head a prize crew. I was in the 5th grade when I read about that. Had Farragut gone to my school, he would have been in the 7th. You might remember that as a rough index of how far our maturity has been retarded even 50 years ago. Once at sea, the deposed British captain rebelled at being ordered about by a boy and announced he was going below for his pistols, which as a token of respect he'd been allowed to keep. Farragut sent word down that if the captain appeared on deck armed, he would be summarily shot and dumped overboard. He stayed below. So ended David Farragut's first-grade test of sound judgment. At 15, this unschooled young man went hunting pirates in the Mediterranean. Anchored off Naples, he witnessed an eruption of Vesuvius and studied the mechanics of volcanic action. On a long layover in Tunis, the American consul, troubled by Farragut's ignorance, tutored him in French, Italian, mathematics, and literature. Consider our Admiral in embryo. I'd be surprised if you thought his education was deficient in anything a man needs to be reckoned with. When I was a schoolboy in Monongahela, I learned how Thomas Edison left school early because the school thought him feeble-minded. He spent his early years peddling newspapers. Just before the age of 12, he talked his mother into letting him work on trains as a train boy, a permission she gave which would put her in jail right now. A train boy was apprentice of all work. Shortly afterwards, a printer gave Edison some old type he was about to discard, and the boy, successfully begging a corner for himself in the baggage car to set type, began printing a 4-page newspaper the size of a handkerchief about the lives of the passengers on the train and the things that could be seen from its window. Several months later, 12-year-old Edison had 500 subscribers, earning a net profit monthly of about 25% more than an average schoolteacher of the day made. When the Civil War broke out, the newspaper became a gold mine. Railroads had telegraph facilities, so the war news was available to Edison as quickly as to professional journalists, but he could move it into print sooner than they could. He sold the war to crowds at the various stops. The Grand Trunk Herald sold as many as 1,000 extra copies after a battle, at prices per issue from a dime to a quarter, amassing Edison a handsome stake. Unfortunately, at the same time, he had been experimenting with phosphorus in the baggage car. One thing led to another, and Edison set the train on fire. Otherwise, there might never have been a light bulb. When I was a schoolboy in Monongahela, I learned with a shock that the men who won our revolution were barely out of high school by the standards of my time. Hamilton was 20 in the retreat from New York, Burr, 21, Light Horse Harry Lee, 21, Lafayette, 19. What amounted to a college class rose up and struck down the British Empire, afterwards helping to write the most sophisticated governing documents in modern history. When I was a schoolboy in Monongahela, I learned the famous Samuel Pepys, whose diary is a classic, wasn't just an old gossip, but president of the Royal Society, the most prominent association of scientists in existence in the 17th century. He was also Secretary of the Admiralty. Why that's important to our investigation of modern schooling is this. Pepys could only add and subtract right up to the time of his appointment to the Admiralty, but quickly learned to multiply and divide to spare himself embarrassment. I took a different lesson from that class than the teacher intended, I think. At the age of 5, when I entered the 1st grade, I could add, subtract, and multiply because Dad used to play numbers games with my sister and me in the car. He taught me the mastery of those skills within a matter of a few hours, not years and years as it took in school. We did all calculations in our heads with such gusto, I seldom use a pencil today even for much more intricate computation. Pepys verified my father's unstated premise. You can learn what you need, even the technical stuff, at the moment you need it or shortly before. Sam Pepys wasn't put in charge of Britain's sea defense because he knew how to multiply or divide, but because he had good judgment, or at least was thought so.